Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all are well fed. We are going to get started. I would like to introduce your MC for this afternoon, Amy McNamara, who was on the steering committee for BeaverCon. So she is one of the many people who had a hand in making this event come together. So Amy McNamara, without further ado, our MC for the afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so pleased to get to steward this afternoon's great set of conversations. And we're going to kick it off with a session on learning whether the fish are damned. People, beavers, and fish. And I'm going to turn it over to Elyssa Whipple with the Methow and Okanagan Beaver Project, who's going to steward and introduce the other speakers. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'll try to bring my voice down. Thanks so much for joining this session. Are the fish damned? People's Beaver and Fish is a wonderful group of people sharing some knowledge with you. This is not a comprehensive 1 hour, less than 1 hour session. So each of us are available for more conversations. Love to learn from you afterwards around your experiences with beavers and fish. So let me just predicate the whole thing right there. You can only share so much in 50 minutes. So I'm going to kick us off, and we're going to keep moving. Save your questions for the end. Hopefully we'll have some time, but find us if you have some questions that you'd love to ask further. Please come to the National Beaver Working Group open house tonight at the Rayback Collective, and you could ask a lot of questions there. We'll have lots of time to visit. Okay, I am Elyssa Whipple with the Methow Okanagan Beaver Project, formerly Methow Beaver Project. And we do work with beavers and people to restore our watersheds, all the things that takes. But here we're going to talk about, are the fish damned when beavers return to a system, or if they've been there a while? That's a controversial question, and there's a lot of different answers to it. One of the best ones is maybe in our highly modified, human simplified watersheds at this point in 2024. So what I like to say is maybe not. One of the things that we've discovered in our 15 years of work at the Methow Beaver Project and Methow Okanagan Beaver Project is that when we actually look and try to answer those very questions, are fish getting downstream, upstream of beaver dams, we're finding answers that are quite affirmative, positive. But it depends on the conditions and whether that's a good thing for fish to be getting past those beaver dams. So this is a dammed system on an anadromous river, the Methow River, a side channel where beavers moved in after a salmon restoration project, and they were not being tolerated, but we asked them to coexist with beavers and let us see if salmon were utilizing that site, and they have used it. They've used the heck out of it, far more than they were using it prior to beavers moving in. So I just want to put that out there. And of course, beavers have been around for 7.5, nearly 8 million years, co-evolving with salmon. So of course they can live together, but what are the circumstances that we're asking them to live together in? That's the most important question that we can ask ourselves when working with this controversial issue. Fish are in decline for all the reasons listed here. I'm not going to go through them. This will be available as a PDF afterwards. Most of you are real familiar with it. Those are the facts. This is the fiction. Beaver dams always block fish passage? No, always. No, definitely not. Fish need unimpeded passage year-round. Definitely not. That's not a natural system either. Beavers eat fish? Come on. Beaver impoundments always reduce water quality, temperature, DO? Absolutely not true. We have data to show it. It can happen, yes, but not always. Oh, sorry. And beavers and human infrastructure cannot exist together. That's just horse patootie because we're doing it. The status quo isn't working, so we need to find the ways to get beavers back in the system, to give it a shot, experiment, work on collaboration, build your partnerships. That's what you're going to hear from partnerships made today, case studies to talk about fish and beavers coexisting together with people. And I just want to show you, these circles are all around passage through a salmon habitat restoration site. Maybe they're not there year-round, but they're there during the most critical parts of many of our salmon species passage times. So I'm not going to go through why beavers are so great. Most of you already know that, and you can look at this as a resource for later. And now this is just some eye candy as I introduce why we think about beavers and fish and passage of dams, and what we can learn through this session about asking questions about, is it not working? How can we make it work better? So you're going to hear from Nick Walrath and Sara Porterfield from Trout Unlimited about barriers are actually really hard to create when you're working with fish. They tend to get past them. Elyssa Kerr, who's going to talk about the permitting and monitoring challenges of fish passage over beaver dams. And Ben Nugent and Sandy Walczyk are going to talk about a really cool project in the Northeast, working with alewives and beaver dam passage. Joe Weirich from Methow Okanagan Beaver Project is going to talk about steelhead and chinook in a beaver dammed anadromous area in the Methow, Washington State. I'm going to talk about Salmon Creek in Washington State, where salmon and beavers are coexisting together. And then we will wrap it up for Q&A. Hold on to your seats, peeps. Here comes Nick.
Hey everyone, I am Sara Porterfield with Trout Unlimited. I'm our Western Water Policy Advisor, which means that I am an expert neither on fish nor beavers, but federal policy, so save all those questions for everybody else who's going to be speaking here. I'm going to talk a little bit about TU broadly, and then I'm going to turn it over to Nick to talk about his work specifically in Wyoming. At TU, our mission is to bring together diverse interests to care for and recover rivers and streams so our children can experience the joy of wild and native trout and salmon. And we do this through working on the ground in communities all across the country. We've got, I think, 350 staff, depending on the season, about 150 project managers around the country, 160 infrastructure projects, and about $157 million in federal funding through where we are now in 2024. And we implement our mission through these on-the-ground projects through our national staff. Nick and I are both national staff, state councils, local chapters, and grassroots volunteers. We work at all levels from, getting school kids out and building beaver dam analogs to national staff going to and local staff going to DC to advocate for our priorities. These are some of our impacts from just 2023, the last year that we have kind of roll-up numbers for. We use a mix of federal, state, local, and private funding to do our work, and some of the project examples that you'll see here. Our protect work is mostly national monuments and withdrawals from oil and gas leasing that protect streams and river corridors. Our process-based restoration work generally goes under both the restore and reconnect, restoring miles of river, as well as reconnecting systems and then reconnecting rivers to their floodplains. We also recently finished a comprehensive assessment in every state in which TU works to identify what we're calling our priority waters. You can see that these are across the country in all the places where trout and salmon live in these cold water systems. And these priority waters are places where we have the greatest opportunity, where we have the highest potential to implement our mission to protect, restore, and conserve trout and salmon fisheries. Here's a little bit zoomed in look at our priority waters here. And I'm going to turn over to Nick to talk specifically about his project work in southwest Wyoming in the Upper Green River Basin and Muddy Creek.
Hi, everybody. Nick Walrath. I'm the Senior Green River Project Manager for Trout Unlimited. And I've been at it in western Wyoming for about 14 years now. Just building on a little bit history of what's going on in Wyoming here. Those are the priority waters with the staff. We really pride ourselves in putting staff on the ground in the basins we're working to get this work done. All right, specifically in the Colorado River Basin, I've been, like I said, I've been at it for 14 years. A lot of my historical, fish habitat work has been high-tech form-based type work. And some of that has to do with protecting Colorado River cutthroat trout, to working with the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, federal agencies, and federal landowners to protect the Colorado River cutthroat trout. Historically, Colorado River cutthroat trout only live in they only live in about 15% of their historical distribution, and it's mainly isolated to these high elevation headwater streams, and a lot of that has to do with non-native invasive fish, so rainbow trout, brook trout, outcompete Colorado River cutthroat trout for resources, and then essentially they disappear out of those streams. So these populations are very important. So we actually create fish barriers below these populations. These fish barriers are highly engineered. They're they're very expensive. We use a lot of data from folks at the swim lab up in CSU to make sure those fish can't make those jumps at all flows. So obviously we can't, not 1,000-year flood event or something like that, but the majority of the flows, we normally design these to function at a 100-year flood event, that it's still going to be a fish barrier. So those populations are still going to be protected from invasion of non-native fish. So I guess what I'm getting at is, these barriers are expensive, they're highly engineered, and then in the case of Gilbert Creek, after about 15 years, this barrier at this point, it was not a fish barrier, so it was actually passing fish at this point. There was a siphon that started about 30 yards upstream, and there were fish actually swimming through the substrate, getting above this barrier. So after 15 years, there was still, so there's still all this maintenance that needs to take into account on an actual fish barrier. So in my line of work, when we start talking about beaver dam analogs in some of these systems that have trout, I really don't think too much about them being fish barriers, because there's lots of different ways, like she was mentioning, that fish can get around these things. Here's just some eye candy, like she was, but just some successful beaver dam analog projects. Some of the things that Brian Hodge and I with the science team have been talking about when we look at different projects in the Colorado River Basin. I think we really need to understand if this work is actually going to, maybe those fish don't need to move as much as they used to because of this work. Also, maybe there is a population that needs access to different habitat above some of these project sites at all times. So, I think when you're thinking about those projects, you need to think about those different things. One thing that Brian has really brought up is looking at if you install 50 beaver dam analogs over the course of 2 miles, maybe that is a hindrance to fish passage, but is it that big a deal? So those are just, things I wanted to bring up just for conversation to get the ball rolling here. These are some of the references that I use. A couple of those are references I use to actually test to see if something's going to be a fish barrier. So, the Weirich study actually has numbers and a equation of how fast and how far a brook trout can jump. So when we run those fish barriers through models, we know it's going to be a fish barrier. And then she said to hold questions, but I had some cool pictures of beavers in a beaver dam analog project. All right.
Man, 10 minutes is not enough to talk about fish. Hi, I'm Elyssa Kerr. I'm the executive director of Beavers Northwest. This is me standing on a beaver dam in the Methow to prove to you that I get out in the field too. Beavers Northwest is a nonprofit based in the Puget Sound region in Washington with a mission of increasing acceptance and understanding of beavers to support healthier and more resilient ecosystems. So we do this through a lot of different ways. We lead workshops to teach people about coexistence. We get the public out on nature walks. We are all mostly based in the Seattle area. There's a lot of urban beavers in Seattle, so we get a chance to help people meet their beaver neighbors. But we also do a lot of technical assistance and coexistence flow device installation. And this is where we get to this permitting hurdle. In Washington, where I work, all work in water requires a permit from our local Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. It's called an HPA permit. You have to get one to do work in water. It's great. It's meant to prevent negative impacts to fish and wildlife and our ecosystems. And miraculously, beavers have been recognized in all of these systems, and we actually have state code that talks specifically about beaver coexistence devices, which is pretty cool, right? That's like, wow, people saw that there are beavers around and that, this is important to think about as we're managing these systems. But unfortunately, our Washington administrative code that talks about these beaver systems is a little wacky. So the wacky whack is our Washington administrative code. And this section refers to water level control device installation, design, and construction. We're talking about beaver coexistence devices here. Cool. But this language is very confusing. This is a lot of words. I'm going to distill it down for you. We're talking about water level control device installation. And what it says is that when we install these devices during low flows, flow must pass through the device to maintain fish passage. It also says during low flows, the device will convey enough flow over and around the dam to pass fish. So this has started getting people to kind of like turn their wheels and think like, okay, how do we meet these criteria? And it's got us thinking a lot about how fish move through these beaver dam systems. So in our area, we're dealing mostly with our Pacific salmon. They're very popular, they're amazing. Anadromous fish that spend a lot of their life out in the ocean return to spawn in our freshwater streams, and then the juveniles out-migrate back to the ocean. So if we think about the life cycle of our adult salmon coming back to our freshwater streams in the fall, that's when we're getting a lot of rain. We're seeing a lot of water moving over and around beaver dams, and fish are moving over and around beaver dams, right? Beavers taught salmon to jump, as Elyssa said. But if we think about during low flow, at the life stage of salmon, what's happening, this is often in the summer for us, low flow, this is when the juveniles are out migrating back to the ocean. And often what we see is that at low flows, during these summertime drought events, or just generally low flow times of year, as our salmon are migrating downstream, there's less water flowing over that beaver dam, right? Sometimes there might even be freeboard between the dam crest and the height of the pond behind that dam. And so these fish are moving through the interstitial spaces of the dam. Maybe seasonally they can't pass a beaver dam, right? As Elyssa mentioned, maybe they don't pass all times of year. But this is what's happening during low flow, is we're getting kind of different passage mechanisms around a beaver dam. So now if we think about installing a coexistence device, how are we changing this fish passability, or are we? So if we think about a pond leveler, when we install a pond leveler, we put it in, we're trying to maintain a pond height and ideally kind of maintain a dam height, right? Beavers don't just keep building that dam 20 feet higher to try and make it bigger and better when there's no water being entrained behind it. So as we think about how water is moving through the system, again, with a pond leveler now installed, if we're in the fall during adult salmon spawning and migration, water is moving through our coexistence device, through our pipe. It's probably maybe flowing around and over the dam at times as well, right? We're still getting that big, heavy flows that are pushing water in different directions. So fish may choose to go in the pipe. They may choose to take those normal routes they've taken before over and around that beaver dam. They may use all these different side passages that Elyssa showed in one of her photos. And this is great. We love that. And then if we think about during low flows, what might be happening? In some of our systems, like I said, water comes down and maybe we're not seeing water flowing through our device. Maybe we're not seeing water flow over and around that dam. Maybe we're seeing water flow in a lot of different weird ways, right? But this is where that wacky whack comes back to haunt us, because it wants to talk about low flows, and it wants us to make sure that during low flows, water is passing through the pipe or the device of any sort. And it's also allowing enough flow over and around the beaver dam to pass fish. But as we talked about, that's not always happening, right? Water isn't always moving over and around the dam. Maybe it's not always moving through our device. How can we meet this wacky whack if that's not the way the system functions? So we've kind of started to butt heads with different people as we all come to this from different sides of things and understanding how do we possibly meet this criteria that isn't really based on how our ecosystem functions. And so we have encountered some different regulators that treat this really differently. Alexa's been really lucky on her side of the state in eastern Washington, where they just say, well, those seem cool, and it seems to work, so you can keep installing them. It makes sense. And then we've encountered some people in my region, kind of in the Seattle area, who say, well, actually, I'm not so sure. You're not meeting this if there's water not flowing through and around the device during low flows. So we want you to monitor this really heavily to understand what's happening. And so we've encountered some monitoring requirements that are pretty intense. I'm pulling these from an email that I just got with Allison Cook, who's here, from DFW a couple weeks ago, asking for these requirements if we were going to install a pond leveler. One of which is they wanted really high frequency of monitoring. They wanted a minimum of weekly monitoring of these structures until it's stabilized. We don't really know what stabilized means, but weekly monitoring is pretty aggressive. And then every other week for the first few months, then roughly every 3 months. Pond levelers and coexistence devices should be monitored, absolutely. We want to monitor and maintain them. They are adaptive. We need to have people with eyes on them. But weekly is aggressive and takes a lot of time and resources to do. And then the things they wanted us to document with these monitoring visits is documenting approximate percentage of flows through the pipe as compared to total discharge downstream. That can be really difficult when you look at a system like the one I've pictured here, right? I don't see a lot of flow coming through my pipe. I don't really see a lot of flow in the stream at all right beneath this beaver dam, right? It's really hard to assess what is that percentage of flow in either direction and where is all that water coming from. We had a great talk from Ellen Wool earlier about that, vertical engagement, right? There's water moving underground that we can't see. There's water moving in all these funky ways that's really hard to assess in a really quick monitoring visit. You want to document if water is overtapping or passing through the dam, document evidence of beaver activity, cool, we can do that. Provide photos for all of the above, and then document fish presence and activity above and below the beaver dam. How do we do that on a weekly basis? Are we supposed to be out there electrofishing? Are we just visually looking for fish? What happens if I don't see any? What are my regulators going to say when I come back to them and say, well, I didn't see any fish? Does that mean they were there or not? I don't know. I was there for 10 minutes once a week, right? So these are a lot of the things we're talking about. And then any important data that indicates fish passability. We need to just report that. So these are kind of the monitoring requirements that were bestowed upon us in certain regions for these devices that are really difficult to meet and don't really have a clear path forward, right? What do we do with all this data and what does it mean when we collect it? So a lot of this has led to some innovation in our area. Me and my team have been installing devices called notch exclusion fences. I talked about them at the 2022 BeaverCon. Happy to talk about them ad nauseum. It's something we've been trying in a way to kind of get around pond levelers and hopefully meet some of these requirements. There are pros and cons to them, for sure. But more to come, for sure. And I just wanted to highlight that, Washington is a great place to do beaver work. We have a really hefty number of partners that are working on beaver relocation, on beaver coexistence, on beaver policy, and we all work really closely together. And sometimes I think of us, I'm like, man, Washington is doing it right. We're so cool, we're crushing it. And then we run into problems like this wacky whack and the things that we're dealing with here. And so there's definitely always more that we can be doing, and all of the collaboration is so, so important to keep this work moving forward. So that being said, join the Policy and Management National Beaver Working Group. Doing a plug for Elyssa here, who's one of the co-chairs of it. There's lots of work that we can be doing on a national level, on a local and regional level, and we all can contribute to it to make these policies better and help us, have science-based beaver management. So thank you. Never count your money when beavers are at the table.
Hi, everyone. I need to apologize up front. I am losing my voice, so I'm going to try to get through this. I'm Sandy Walczyk. I'm currently with the Nature Conservancy. When I worked on this project, though, I was with a local land trust called the Blue Hill Heritage Trust. I'm here with Ben Nugent from USDA Wildlife Services. If I do lose my voice, he's going to take over before he was supposed to, so just bear with us. We're doing non-lethal beaver management facilitating alewife passage. So we're from, again, Maine. I don't know how many East Coasters are here, but, pretty different environment than out in Colorado. This is the Blue Hill Peninsula in Maine, located on the coast about midway up. near Bar Harbor, if anyone has visited Acadia National Park. It's pretty wet, it's very forested, and there are lots of beaver. So we don't have the issues with not having beaver. We do have fish passage issues, though. And can raise hands, anybody know what an alewife is? Okay, good. All right, good. So great. A lot of times when we talk about alewives, people have no idea what we're talking about. There's a lot of salmon work out here. We have Atlantic salmon in Maine. We have brook trout. We have a lot of other, fish like that. But this project we focused on alewives, which are sea-run herring species native to the eastern U.S. They're very important ecologically and economically in Maine. They're used for lobster bait, or they were traditionally, which is a big industry in Maine. The populations dropped pretty dramatically due to all of the same reasons that a lot of anadromous fish populations have dropped in the last 100 years. But those populations are recovering due to some very concerted efforts. So as the populations of alewives recover, the issue of beaver and alewife is coming up, because alewives migrate upstream in the early spring, the adults do, and then they migrate back downstream fairly quickly to the ocean. Then the young migrate slowly back out to the ocean throughout the whole summer. And something cool I didn't realize is they actually just migrate their face forward and just slide backward down the river into the ocean, which I think is pretty neat. Alewife migration can be blocked by beaver dams. This is pretty well established. They're not as strong of swimmers as trout or salmon. They are pretty strong swimmers, but there's definitely a known issue with beaver dams blocking alewife migration. And the issue, like a lot of these species, is that these populations were so reduced and are so concentrated that now what didn't used to be an issue because there was millions of fish and so many beaver is now an issue because there's a limited amount of fish recovering in a small area. Blue Hill Heritage Trust participated in alewife restoration projects for years. They got really involved in beaver management on some of their properties, and we actually had Skip Lyle, who I'm sure a lot of you know, come out and install beaver devices on some of our properties. And then I attended this conference 2 years ago and started putting all these ideas together, and we talked to a lot of local folks that were interested in looking at the challenge of facilitating alewife passage and promoting ecological benefits of beaver on the same landscape. Alewife people tend to hate beaver, and beaver people don't hate alewife people, but there's a lot of conflict. Like, the serious people get very angry at each other. So we were fortunate enough for this project. It was we had a lot of trust in a lot of local groups, and they collaborated together in a way that we really weren't sure was going to be possible. The Blue Hill Heritage Trust, USDA APHIS Wildlife Services, Maine Center for Coastal Fisheries, a bunch of local alewife committees. So Maine has lots of regional and local management of these issues. All these folks came together along with all of the state agencies and U.S. Fish and Wildlife and a really generous funder to work on this project all together. So it was a really collaborative process. We developed the process throughout the fall of 2023 into the early spring of 2024, and a lot of that early work was so many meetings, so many emails, really building that trust and the relationships with these groups, because people were very hesitant. They really didn't think this was going to work, but they kind of agreed to come together and work with the Land Trust because they trusted the Blue Hill Heritage Trust, and so they came and worked with us. We identified a couple of sites based on various criteria, some of which were just that the landowners would let us access the area. We went through many project proposal revisions, which we had to submit to regulators and got their approval on. Then we got landowner permission and written approval. The project was then installed in May 2024, and we did a bunch of monitoring, really intensive monitoring throughout May and June. That was everyday monitoring for that, I think it was a month or 6 week period, and Ben will talk more about that. And then in fall 2024, we did a big project debrief with all the partners and came together in person, which people really loved. And just the way that this worked is that the Blue Hill Heritage Trust got funding, and then we contracted out USDA APHIS to do the actual device installation and monitoring work in concert with us. So it was a collaborative effort, but we did hire USDA APHIS, which I didn't realize was possible, but you can do it. So Ben's now going to talk about the actual project.
Thanks, Sandy. Hi, everybody. This was a really exciting project, kind of a new frontier for us. We do install a lot of water flow devices in Maine at beaver sites throughout the state, and this was the first time we were going to do it, where we were going to try to maintain alewife passage. Here's what one of the sites that we selected looked like. prior to us arriving on site. So it was an active beaver site. Walker Stream, prior to this, volunteers would rip open the beaver dam daily or several times a week to allow the alewives to pass through the dam. So we got there and opened it up more, and we looked at a lot of different flow device designs. We thought we had to get real, real creative and try to come up with something totally new. We have our deceiver fences or fence and pipe devices, and in the end, we ended up going with something simple because we needed to make sure alewives could get upstream, but then also back downstream. So having a pipe system seemed like it might be difficult for the fish to find their way back downstream. So because of that, we went with like a deceiver fence that we would normally build to protect a road culvert, and we just made it longer. So we built this. This is 30 feet long and 5 feet wide, using the epoxy-coated concrete wire mesh, 6-inch by 6-inch square openings. And we got that in place. We were going to actually add a pipe in at the end just to help get that distance, get through the dam. But while we were in the water putting this in, Sandy was like, "Do we really need this?" And we all got to thinking, I guess not. So we went without it. We were like, we could always add it later, and it worked just fine the way it was. So, and while we were putting this in place, the alewives were actually coming right up through. So immediately we knew this was going to work, at least from the fish perspective. And all the community pre-planning was so important because, for decades, so many people have been working so hard to restore alewives, and they didn't want us to mess that up, and I don't blame them. So that's why we did this, and we had to monitor every day. As you'll see upstream, there's a beaver lodge, so there was active beaver on site. And as soon as we got this in, the first night of monitoring, I was there counting the fish. About 3,000 went through in 1 hour. So they weren't slowed down at all. So it was a great, it was really exciting. And then the beaver came down that night, right before dark, checked things out. And I'm like, oh, here we go. Beavers, swam around and then went back upstream and never built against this. So this is a seasonal device. But from the end of April to mid-June, never placed a stick. So it worked really well. Really, really exciting. This is a picture underwater GoPro footage of the fish, the alewives passing through. It was really exciting to be there, be a part of the migration, and it was really awesome. I'm running out of time, so second site, really big stream. We decided to go with the same design, but we couldn't pound any signposts into the substrate. It was all rock. So we got a hammer drill, and we drilled into all the rocks surrounding it and cabled the device into place and put some wooden frames inside for stability. And that worked great. You can see the beavers were active here, and they did build right at the choke point where we expect them to build, and then they left it alone after that. So beavers were happy, alewives were happy, all the fisheries folks were happy. It was really a win-win. Everybody was pleasantly surprised, really exciting. And then we pulled all these out mid-June after the adults migrated back downstream. And I'll let Sandy jump back in.
All right, we only have a little bit of time. We learned a lot of lessons. Really, planning was super important. Partnerships really important. Getting landowner permission in writing, which almost ruined the whole project. Having multiple site options, being flexible. We weren't able to gather a ton of rigorous quantitative data just because of the nature of how the fish went through. So that's something we need to work on. But really, just those partnerships and relationships were so important. In the future, we hope to continue at maybe the same locations and different ones to expand to other places. We had a lot of people interested from other places around the area that came to talk to us and came to our final debriefing. And then maybe leaving the devices in for longer in the summer so those young can migrate back through. We did have issues where when we took the devices out later in the season, we were informed that the beaver were then blocking the young migration back out. So who funds it, who completes the work, those things are all still very much up in the air. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joe Weirich. I'm the restoration coordinator for the Methow Beaver project. This is my first BeaverCon. I'm very excited to talk to you all and share a story about a site that's pretty significant to me. 4 years ago, when I started the Methow Beaver project, this was my first gig with them. So, yeah, I've been monitoring this site pretty intensively ever since. It's called Silver Side Channel. It's just south of Twisp, here in the Methow watershed. That little red star right there. And then in the right slide, you can see the outline of the channel, and then those red ovals indicate these extant side channels that would activate and still do activate at really high flows, like moderate to severe in our region, over 18,000 CFS. So we don't see that happen very often, but they are significant for potential future restoration. Silver has some cultural significance to settlers in the Methow Valley. It was the location of the first town, denoted by the fact that it had the only post office. So all of the settlers in the valley would come and gather here to wait for the mail to come over from the Okanagan watershed, which makes you kind of happy that you can get reached by email nowadays, right? The town didn't last very long. In the late 1800s, it was washed away by a flood, and then they rebuilt the town higher up on the floodplain, but then the silver mine, of which it was namesake, went dry, and so the town dissolved and then dispersed throughout the valley. In more recent history, the land has changed property ownership quite a bit. The right side, the east side, is still primarily private holdings, agriculture and residential, but then WDFW owns the west side of the floodplain there. In 2017, Silver Side Channel was restored for salmon habitat. The org that did the restoration dredged the side channel, which you can see in that big, beautiful braid right there. And then they also constructed these hemi-marshes that were supposed to hold fish and other amphibians and such. There was historic beaver activity at this site. As far as anyone remembers, beavers have been using this side channel. And the folks who were restoring it didn't have a plan for what the beavers would do immediately after when they moved in, blocked that narrow outlet, and created an Olympic swimming pool out of a lazy river. So we were super psyched about this, but the people who did the restoration lost a lot of money in plantings. And then this flooding is also threatening the private house that's right at the mouth of the river. So there was a lot of discussion about what was going to be done. The org asked WDFW to have the beavers removed, and they were not cool with that, so they contracted us to put in a flow control device. And I'm not gonna go into the parts and pieces of ours, but I just wanna point out ours has two outtakes. We have one, the larger cage, that is primarily for conveyance of water to abate the flooding, but then we also have a smaller cage that's set lower in the water column to help any fish leave if for some reason the pond dries out, or if there are temperature issues or DO problems, the fish have a chance to leave. That thing is set really close to the bottom, hoping that fish migrate down to the deepest part of the pond and then find their way out. This is a few photos of us. Elyssa Kerr and the folks at Beaver Corps helped us design it and put it in. I'm gonna blast through these real quick because you've seen a lot of them. And this is our final product over here after we've camouflaged it so it doesn't look so industrial. There's an overhead photo of our flow control devices sitting in there. And you can see that big, long, wooded thing is our flow pipe. And so that's not a jumpable dam. It's too long, okay? And so we were not sure if fish could actually move in through the system until we found this photo of two coho salmon nipping at the heels of a beaver in front of our two intake cages. So coho salmon were able to migrate up the pipe and spawn inside this pond. And it also has been doing a tremendous job sustaining our juvenile salmon populations. We've had tremendous coho, steelhead, and chinook returns. I just took part in my first survey this year, and we saw a lot of salmon in there. Here's a picture of some of them. It supports all of our charismatic megafauna, all the hits, all the big ones, they're there. But my favorite ones are these. It hosts a flock of trumpeter swans that spend at least 2 to 3 months every winter wintering in the new developed beaver pond. These are big birds. They need big runways and landing strips, open water for them to survive. And so they've been utilizing this site for the past couple of years. I hate walking in the winter and making them fly away. I'd love to just sit and watch if I could have. There's a blank slide. Again, back to our finished coexistence device. These are tremendous tools for us. They have reduced our need to trap and relocate by so much, and we're so happy to have them, but they are not end-all, be-all silver bullets or complete solutions to any of our problems. We could talk all day about how and when they're most effective, but this is not solving the export problem at Silver Side Channel. Back in the 1950s, a levee was put in at the top, which effectively turned this into a stream flow that would flush out every high flow. it turned it into a marshy wetland that is only fed by 5 to 10 cubic feet of hyperrheic flow every year. So silver side channel is sedimenting in again. It's also becoming more of a pond-like system and heating up. And so that's hosting a lot of invasive species like bullhead, bluegill, and other fish that compete with our native salmonids. So this device is really helping us push off some of these problems, but then until that levee leaves, the system is stuck in an alternative stable state where it's going to continue to degrade at the bottom and then push out our fish and shallow out our deep channels that we really like to see our fish in. So key takeaways from this: when working on a restoration project, always plan for beavers. I know this is a crowd that I don't really have to preach that to, but if you don't plan for them and they show up, you're going to get caught on your back foot, and then you don't want to be in that kind of situation. Keep an open mind. When we first approached these people who lost their restoration to a beaver, impoundment, it was pretty contentious about, why we were going to choose not to trap the beavers out, but, they had an open mind. We listened to them, we understand their concerns, and that's how we came up with this awesome coexistence device. And then, like we talked about earlier, beaver dams are temporal things. The time scales that they are around often go over our heads, and we don't realize that they're supposed to come and go, especially in a system like Silver where it's right off the channel. Those dams are supposed to blow out and then get rebuilt by beavers every other couple years. And so here in the Methow, where we are low on water, fish in these ponds are making it through the summer with deep, cold water. And then maybe if the levee were removed someday, that place would become like one of those fluxes of pond, blowout, scouring, back to salmon, spawning habitat. And then when the beavers come back in a few years later, they'll rebuild the dams, create another pool, and continue the cycle that these fish, likely evolved in the last thousands of years. So with that, I'm going to thank you all for listening to my talk. One plug, Ava Hartman, who is here, you can look her up on the WOVA app. She runs a wildlife sanctuary in British Columbia. She was just given 2 baby beaver kits that she needs to bottle feed, and then she's going to be raising them for the next 2 years until she can release them into the wild. Look up her website, check out her live stream of the baby beavers, and consider giving her a donation because she's got child support, So.
Okay, and one more case study. I know this is a whirlwind. It's kind of how I operate anyways, but Salmon Creek. This is also in the upper Columbia Basin, Okanagan watershed. This is a site where the Colville tribes, Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation, have been managing for coho and steelhead primarily in perpetuity. But they were fighting against an irrigation system and allocation that did not allow steelhead to make it through Salmon Creek. In fact, all the water was taken for a golf course and orchards until the Colville tribes had an opportunity to purchase some of the water rights back. And they did. And now, for the last 3 years, they've been keeping water in Salmon Creek. And the beavers love it, absolutely love it. So this is a site where they really saw the value of beavers in Salmon Creek because they are doing a lot of monitoring, especially around snorkel surveys and pit tagging and monitoring with microarrays or general arrays as well as microarrays. So they didn't want the beavers to go. They didn't want to trap them out, but they needed to make a very simplified system, a single channel, no floodplain inner engagement. So there really was no opportunity for the beavers to create a lot of complexity in this site and allow seasonal flooding passage to really become a normal seasonal thing. So what we did, they called us and like, how do we do this? And having worked with Elyssa Kerr, who's started using notch protectors, much like the ones they've used in Maine for alewife passage, we decided to try this, but with the intention, like in Maine, of making it a seasonal coexistence device or flow device and fish passage device. It worked beautifully. There's arrays. I could probably show you the rest of the slides. That might help. The fish array SA1 is downstream. Fish array SAD is upstream of the beaver dam right in the center there. Just to give you an idea of how large and simplified a system can be. This is actually not that simple compared to some we work in, but large enough that there was no way even a really healthy steelhead, like the most athletic fish out there practically, was going to jump over. There wasn't a jump pool at the bottom. So they had their work cut out for them, and they were stuck below this dam. So when we opened up, and I have to say the opening was a little enthusiastic by the fish bio, pretty much brought it way down. So I wouldn't do this next year, and I'll tell you why, and you'll see a picture in a minute. But we ended up protecting this notch, and within the first 48 hours, more than 20 steelhead passed that point. So we knew it worked right away, and it was really exciting to be in partnership with the tribes. We've done that a fair bit, but never on a coexistence project like this. So there's the array again, showing 20 fish moving upstream. But the beavers never actually rebuilt that big dam. It was too big of a breach. They couldn't rebuild it with the flows that came through, and it scoured it even more. But they just moved downstream and built another one. So that's basically what all of us, I think, here want to encourage everyone in the audience and everyone you talk to about fish moving forward into the future, fish and beavers, is that you got to be creative. We've changed our watersheds so much. There's no reason we can't try to change them a little more to accommodate fish and beavers and all the ecological benefits to all the other species, including us, for keeping more water on the landscape longer in our riparian systems, in our wetlands, in our streams, to support resilience and sustainability in a really insecure future for water. So I want to just thank you all for being here and invite questions in the last few minutes that we have, and ask all of our presenters to come back up if anyone would like to ask a question, or you have a case study that you want to talk about later in person, face-to-face, a little easier. That's fine too. So thanks to all my presenters. I just want to say that. And as much as I don't want to get rid of this slide, this is a photo from Ben Goldfarb out in Minnesota. So, but I'll give all the contact information for folks if people want to see that. Any questions? Oh, Rob.
I mean, I'll let Ben answer too. No. The one thing we did with these systems were not ones we did check with Federal Fish and Wildlife. If these had been streams that had any potential for Atlantic salmon in them or any known populations, we would have been much more highly regulated and probably wouldn't have been able to work in those systems. So that's a lot of funding that potentially might be available for fish passage. I have heard is sort of not available because of the Atlantic salmon issue. They're just so few of those fish that really I don't have experience with it, and it would be very regulated if we were allowed to work in those systems.
Actually, we're not going to be taking questions from the audience. We want you to be using your app, just because we can't get all of we won't be able to hear everybody. So, sorry, we're going to take questions, but they're not going to be coming directly. So I have one for you, which is, for folks in the Pacific Northwest, have you seen any evidence of successful Pacific lamprey passage in addition to salmonids?
I have not watched a lamprey go through any of our coexistence devices, but we do have evidence that ammoseeds have moved from downstream, where the Colville tribes did reintroduce lamprey ammoseeds into the system, and then we found them upstream. Whether they were ones that no one knew were there before is debatable. So I've seen them upstream and downstream of a newly reintroduced population of lamprey.
I'm just waiting to see if we have about 6 more minutes, so
What if I have a loud voice and I know the crowd will hear my question?
go for it.
Could you talk a little about the regulatory differences for notch exclusion devices versus sort of the pond levelers, and also with monitoring, what the differences were, or were they the same requirements?
Great question. Difference between pond levelers and notch exclusion fences in terms of permitting is that pipes are scary and fences are not. And so the notch exclusion fences in my region did not require as extensive of monitoring. They did not ask for those same monitoring requirements. That being said, they're new, and beavers tend to interact with them a little differently than they do with pond levelers. So we are monitoring them maybe a little more heavily than we need to for a pond leveler, because I think partially because that flow is right there. When you put in a pond leveler, the flow's in the pipe, beavers throw a couple sticks on it, and they forget about it. The notch exclusion fence, it's like driving them wild. There's not much there except that 6x6 mesh. So that's the main difference that I have for you. Happy to talk more, Kirby. Sure.
I'm not seeing them.
I've got one.
Great, throw them up there.
So the question is, are there instances when manipulating beaver dams for passage structures has completely pushed beavers out of the area, causing them to abandon their lodge, etc.? Not in our case. We take diligent care to make sure that when we're setting the pond level, that it does not bring the base level of the water below the subaquatic entrances to the beaver dams. That is key. Excuse me, the beaver lodges. They enter their lodge from underwater, right? And so you need to give them enough headspace above their entrance in order for them to feel safe going in and out of the lodge. And so when we are notching the dam and determining where and what level we're going to set our pipe, we have already measured at the dam or lodge entrances the amount of free space we have before we drop it down too low where the lodge entrance is being exposed. So that's how we get around that issue. And as long as that level is kept high enough, the beaver feels safe enough that they don't need to modify or try to dam on our coexistence devices.
I want to add to what Joe said, that these are a Band-Aid. These are not the forever long-term problem resolution. This is a short-term solution until this community of very smart, creative people in this room help figure out how to make land acquisitions higher priority for keystone species and resilience engineers to have a more valued place in our watersheds. So this is not like something to rest on our laurels with, because things do happen. Beavers do abandon places. Beavers get trapped out of those places on our public lands. And trapping's not wrong. It's just when we're prioritizing keeping beavers in a place for restoration, for species-specific recovery, we need to have some tools in our management toolkit to keep them from being trapped out for recreational or commercial use. So that said, we have a lot of issues we have to be addressing in complex environments that we're trying to promote. And that's why we're all here, is to share the knowledge based on policy, management, practical application, and thank you. And how do we share that as effectively as possible and apply it to our very specific context within our states and our regions and our local municipalities? Come share your knowledge, come learn more from everyone else who's doing it with the National Beaver Working Groups, please. These committees, 4 committees that are working on each aspect really of beaver management and beaver opportunity and beaver challenge that we're facing across North America. So Europe, yes, we're eventually going to get an international beaver working group for sure, but so glad folks are here from Britain and beyond. But yeah, get involved, share your knowledge, learn from others, apply it. Let's accelerate this and make the revolution irresistible.
We have another question. Can you talk about the decision to make dam notch fish passage devices seasonal? Curious about weighing the amount of work to installing and deconstructing seasonally and the benefits of removing it.
Yeah, so our devices were seasonal because of the sensitivity of the sites and the alewife migration and so many unknowns about how it might impact the fish. So that's why we went with seasonal as a safety measure. But really, it did work out as a nice feature of the project. And then hopefully in the future, we'll leave them in longer and maybe keep growing that time period throughout the year.
I'll just add to that. Maine, we do have issues with ice scour and stuff in the winter, and trying to make a device that can withstand the winter would be much more difficult. And we were able to take them out and put them right on the shore, so installation next year shouldn't be that difficult, and we might decide to leave them in throughout the whole summer season next year.
And I'll add one more thing to that, that our juvenile salmon in the Pacific Northwest, one of their most limiting factors in our rivers is deeper water to overwinter in and not freeze to the bottom. So we wanted the beavers to rebuild that dam after fish passage, whichever species you're looking at and their seasonal needs, and that varies with every species, that we wanted those beavers to eventually be able to rebuild and keep providing the habitat that another life stage of that very same species also requires. Somebody mentioned cost range. These can be incredibly affordable, and really the labor is the most expensive part. The materials are not. It takes us less than 4 hours with a group of 4 people to install one of these, a little bit longer to take them out, especially if there's a high flow event that follows and buries them. But it is quite affordable and absolutely, in our experience, worth doing seasonally. And we can reuse a lot of the materials again. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thanks so much.